computer. Okay. All right, so welcome. This is the first edition of live cooking session for the Arcadian Nights table. So today we are going to be making chocolate chia granola, and then our dinner is going to be Cajun chicken pasta. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to make our granola. So first thing, set your oven to 300 degrees. We're going to go ahead and get that preheated while we prep all of our other ingredients. So first thing that we're going to do is whatever additions you have, so all the seeds, the nuts, the whatever things you have, we're going to go ahead and start measuring those. So we're going to do 1/4 cup of each of them for a total of 1 1/4 cups. So if you only have 2 different things, like let's say you have peanuts and raisins, then we're going to put maybe 1/2 cup of one and 3/4 cup of the other to make that 1 1/4 cup. So you just make it however you want. I know getting ingredients is kind of hard during this time, so whatever you have on hand is perfect. So first thing I have is chia seeds. So they're going to go ahead and go into the bowl. Next thing I have are sunflower seeds. So these are roasted and salted. That's just what the store had. I prefer roasted because I think they have a little bit better flavor, but if you can only find raw, that's fine as well. I'm going to go in. I was able to find pumpkin seeds or pepita seeds, so those are going to go in my granola as well. And then the final thing is going to be the hemp seed. So hemp seed, hemp heart, it's the same thing. It's really just another source of protein. All of these nuts have a very high good protein count and fiber count. So this is going to be a really nutritious granola, as well as tasting really good. It's going to be something that you want to keep snacking on. And then my final thing is going to be almonds. So I have some kind of sliced almond seed here. We're going to put that in as well. And same thing, if you have peanuts, if they're a little bit chopped, that's great. If they're whole, that's fine. Any sort of dried fruit would also go well in here. Any type of nuts, walnuts, pecans, whatever you had would also be great in here. If you did have walnuts or pecans, you just want to watch the cooking time because they do tend to burn a little bit faster than some of the other nuts that I've used or peanuts. But as long as we just keep our eye on that, they'll be fine. So those are our nuts and seeds. They're all in the bowl. We should have about 1 1/4 cup of all that total. Next thing is going to be some oatmeal or some oats. So for this, you really do want the whole rolled oats. So those look like this. So they're going to be those whole oats. That's really just going to give it more texture, as well as they're not already cooked, so we don't have to worry about them being soggy, or if you do have oats that are already chopped up, then we're just going to have to watch the cooking time and make sure that they don't burn. We should be okay, but we'll just check it when we check it at the 15-minute mark. So we're going to go ahead and put 2 cups of our oats into that same bowl. Then our final 2 dry ingredients are a little bit of salt and a little bit of cinnamon. So salt, we're going to go ahead and do 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And that's just going to go right into the bowl as well. And then 1 full teaspoon of cinnamon. I actually need to grab my cinnamon. And I'll be honest, usually I don't measure my cinnamon out just because I really enjoy the taste of cinnamon, but for the purposes of this, I will actually do a full measurement of it. So 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, and that's going to go in as well. Okay. So now we have all of our dry ingredients in there. So all of our nuts and seeds to equal about a 1/4 cup, 2 cups of oats, 1 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and 1 teaspoon of cinnamon. I forgot, our final ingredient, how could I forget, is the best one, is going to be the cocoa. So here I have unsweetened cocoa. If you do have normal sweetened cocoa, that's fine. It's just going to be a little bit sweeter. Nothing wrong with that. This is just what I happen to have on hand. And we're going to do 1/3 cup of cocoa. And that's going to go into our bowl as well. So cocoa powder is just one of the elements that goes into your typical chocolate. So this powder combined with cocoa butter and cocoa oil are all going to be kind of what makes your milk chocolate, dark chocolate, that sort of thing. So all of our dry ingredients are in here. We're going to give it a quick stir before we add in our liquid ingredients. So you want to make sure you're distributing that chocolate all throughout your little mixture. You can see kind of what it looks like here, just very loosely all mixed together. So our 2 liquid ingredients are maple syrup and coconut oil. If you don't have coconut oil, you can use a mixture of olive oil and just add in a little bit more of your maple syrup. If you don't have maple syrup, honey works just as well. We're choosing those 2 sweeteners rather than sugar because they actually have some other properties that we want. So they have a more nutritional value, and they're also kind of a better sweetener, bang for your buck, if you will. You don't have to use quite as much, but you still get a lot of that sweet flavor. So we're going to do 1/3 cup of our maple syrup. We'll go ahead and put that in first. And then we're going to do 1/3 cup of coconut oil. And like I said, if you don't have coconut oil, I would just either double up on your maple syrup. So you do another 1/3 cup, or do some maple syrup / honey with a little bit of olive oil in there. So coconut oil is an oil that's actually going to be solid at room temperature. It's one of the few oils that is solid at room temperature. And as it gets hotter, so in the summer months, it might actually turn liquid in your pantry. So we're going to go ahead and put that in 1/3 of a cup. And we're going to measure it when it's solid, and then we're going to melt it before we put it into our granola. And again, that's only if you're working with coconut oil. If you're working with something else, there's no need to microwave it because it's already in its liquid form. So there we have 1/3 of a cup of coconut oil. So because I have a metal measuring cup, I'm going to put it into another container before I microwave it, because you never want to put metal in the microwave. Hopefully that's a lesson you haven't had to learn the hard way so far, but for a lot of us, it's that life lesson that you learn when you almost break your microwave of metal doesn't go in the microwave. So I found that about 30 seconds is usually all you need for this, but your microwave might be a little bit different than mine. So you can just keep your eye on it, and then when it's liquid, we're going to go ahead and add it to the granola. And then once that's done, all we do is mix, and then we're ready for it to go in the oven once our oven dings to say that it's ready. Just going to take mine and mix it around a little bit. I know my microwave does not heat things thoroughly, or evenly, I should say. MP, you good with everything so far?
Yep.
All right, perfect.
Should we spray the pan if we don't have parchment paper?
No, you don't even need to spray the pan actually, because it'll all just kind of come together well. So you don't need to spray the pan. Some of the oil, like the honey and coconut oil or olive oil, whatever you have, will help loosen it up from the pan itself. All right, so that was my oven telling me that it's at the right temperature. We're going to add the coconut oil into the mixture. And then final thing is just mix it all together. So when you're done with it, it should kind of look like a nice darker chocolate color. It might be a little bit wet, but the dry ingredients and the wet ingredients are pretty well paired in this recipe, so it's not going to be super wet. really, once you kind of see that that cocoa powder is dissolved into your granola, you're not going to have kind of that dry clump of coconut, or I'm sorry, cocoa powder. So this is what mine looks like. Just kind of nice, wet, slightly wet granola. We had a question about whether if you don't have parchment paper, if you need to spray the pan down. You don't need to do that because we do have enough oil in here that it's actually going to release pretty nicely. The only reason that I say parchment paper or silicone baking mat, it is just for easy cleanup. There is no other reason for it. So once you've done mixing your granola, you can go ahead and grab your baking sheet with parchment paper. I'm just using parchment paper that I've already used for my last recipe of granola, so that's why it looks a little bit dirty. And then you're just going to go ahead and plop it on there. And then you want it somewhat evenly mixed, spread out, but it doesn't have to be perfect. Like, it doesn't have to be an exact 1 inch all the way around. It's just so it's not one big blob kind of in the middle of the baking sheet. And that's just to make sure that the granola gets to cook evenly. We don't have any parts that's going to burn or still be kind of that soggy weirdness when we're done with it. So there we go. Granola is complete. So at this point, if you did want to try it, you could, because we haven't put anything in here that you can't eat raw, just to test and get excited for what's coming out of the oven in 15 minutes or 30 minutes, I should say. Once you're done with that and your oven has preheated, you're going to go ahead and put it in and start a timer for 15 minutes. Beautiful. All right, now at this point, if you want to kind of like clean up your workstation, I don't know if you're working in a small kitchen like me, but it is nice to kind of get some of these ingredients you don't need off the table. Then we are going to prep the ingredients for the Cajun chicken. So what that entails is we're going to get a cutting board, and we're going to do our onion and garlic first, and then we're going to go ahead and cut our chicken. And this will all just go into one pot on the stove. So it's pretty nice because you don't have a ton of cleanup at the end for this dinner recipe. One pot is always nice. And we'll go ahead and get started on that. So onion and garlic, these are my two honestly favorite seasonings or things to add. I add them to just about every recipe that I make, because I think they have a really nice base for anything that you're making. So I have 2 onions here just because my onions are small, but 1 onion is fine, and especially if it's a really big onion. You really just want about 1 cup of onion. Doesn't matter if it's white, yellow, sweet, Vidalia, doesn't matter. Onion is onion for this recipe. Some recipes it might be a little bit different. Onions, you want to take off that outer layer, and people have all different ways of taking off that outer skin of the onion. I don't know that I've ever found one is significantly better than the other, but you do want to make sure that you take off kind of this like orange outer layer. What we want is that under skin. That's where the good stuff from the onion lies. And onions, for some people, can have a really strong taste, especially when they're raw. This is going to be cooked down really nicely, so you're just going to get that kind of subtle onion flavor in there. And onion and garlic are really popular in Cajun seasonings. It's one of those kind of magic 3 ingredients that most of their recipes will always call for, are your onion and garlic. Your garlic is going to be the same as your onion. It's going to have that kind of outer protective layer that you don't want to eat. If you have an garlic that is a little bit hard to take that outer layer off, what I do is I smash it with the blade of my knife a little bit, and then that outer skin comes off pretty nicely. So there's 1 onion, kind of outer skin off. And it doesn't have to be perfect. There's always going to be a little bit of that outer skin up at the very top of the onion. We're just going to cut that off once we get going. Okay, so my onions are good to go. And for garlic, you're going to do 2 cloves of garlic, and I have 1 big clove, 1 medium clove, and 1 small clove, so I'm just going to do 3 cloves just because that's what I have and just to kind of use them up. But 2 cloves of garlic is what this recipe calls for. If you don't have garlic, garlic powder is totally fine. You'll probably put about a teaspoon in to substitute. And same thing with the onion. If you don't have onion, you can do onion powder. That'll be fine as well. That you'll put a little bit more. It'll probably be about 1.5 teaspoons to 2 teaspoons. And the great thing with seasonings is always start with less than you think you might need, because you can always go back and add more seasoning, but you can't take it out. So don't start with 1 tablespoon and then you realize, oh my gosh, all I can taste is garlic, because you can't take it out. So chop your garlic. It doesn't have to be super fine. We just want it to be small enough that it's going to cook, and it's going to cook somewhat evenly. So your slices should look at least a little bit uniform, but you're not trying out for Top Chef or Food Network star, so it doesn't have to be perfect by any means. Same thing with your onion. You're going to want to dice it. But if you prefer it to be in slivers, do slivers. This is your recipe. Make it kind of what you want. And again, you can see my knife skills are not something that I'm going to be competing on Chopped Kitchen with. And it's not going to be precise. I do have a couple pieces that are a little bit bigger than others, but like I said, as long as it's generally the same. So my garlic is done. Now for onions, everyone has a different way to cut an onion. Most Italians have very strong preferences on how you cut an onion. I just take the end off because that's not necessarily what we want to be eating. I do usually keep the end where the roots were on, just to kind of hold it together a little bit. And then if I want to dice, what I do is I make kind of 1 big slit right down the middle. And then I make a couple of other slits, so not going all the way through to where the roots are, but stopping just before them. I'm going to make a couple of these slits. Careful not to cut your fingers. So here you can kind of see I can almost like fan my onion out a little bit because it's all still attached here. And then you're going to go perpendicular to those slices and you're going to cut down. And then you can see it kind of already comes chopped. So more bang for your effort. It's not perfect by any means. And you will still have to do a little bit of chopping, but it gets the job done pretty well. And then that end that had the roots on it, you don't need to eat that or want to eat that. Just kind of chop some of those bigger pieces, and then I'm gonna chop my other onion, but like I said, I have 2 small onions, so you just want about 1 cup of onion at the end of it all. Ooh. And then when you're done chopping these 2 guys, you can go ahead and put them in a bowl because we're going to add them to the recipe later. And the next thing we will start on is our chicken. So we did them in this order, onion and garlic and then chicken, because onion and garlic, you don't want to cross-contaminate them. In this recipe, everything is going in the same pot, so it's not as big of a deal, but you never want to cut chicken on a surface that you're then going to cut anything that you're going to eat fresh. So any sort of fresh vegetable, fresh herb, anything like that, because chicken has a lot of bacteria that will harm us if we eat it raw. But this way, you don't have to worry about changing your cutting board because we've already taken the stuff that we're going to cook later and chopped it first. I'm starting to cry a little bit from chopping that onion. I thought I was going to make it through without, but that is not the case. Ooh. Okay. So put that back here and grab my chicken from the fridge. And P, you good, or are we moving too fast?
I'm good.
Perfect. All right, so my chicken, I had chicken thighs in the freezer, so I just defrosted them for this recipe. Chicken thighs and chicken breasts are both obviously great parts of the chicken. They are two different types of meat though. Your chicken breast is going to be your white meat, where your chicken thigh is going to be dark meat. The biggest difference between those is going to be flavor. So chicken thigh has a lot more flavor than a chicken breast does. And the chicken thigh is actually going to be more forgiving if you're trying to cook with it. And what I mean by that is it's going to take a lot more to overcook it. You know how sometimes chicken can come out and it can be super dry? That's usually with chicken breast. Chicken thigh doesn't have that same issue because it holds on to moisture better. So if you're kind of nervous about overcooking your chicken for a meal that you're making for anyone, I would suggest going with chicken thigh and get comfortable with that before moving on to chicken breast. Chicken thighs are also actually a less expensive cut of chicken. So if you are looking to save money, chicken thighs is a great option, and they can always be substituted in any recipe, and you don't have to make any modifications to cooking time or anything like that if you make that substitution. And we're gonna cut our chicken into either cubes or slices, kind of whatever you're feeling. Doesn't really matter. I'm gonna do mine in cubes just because I like cubes better. And we're not looking for necessarily a certain size of cube, but they all should be somewhat uniform. Again, doesn't have to be perfect, but we do want them to cook at about the same rate when we put them in the pot. So I'm doing probably about 1, maybe 1.5 inch little cubes for my squares. Chicken thighs are also going to be a little bit more fatty, which will help with that overcooking tendency. So fat brings juices, keeps juices, makes juices in the cooking process, whereas those chicken breasts, they have very little fat on them, and that's part of the reason why they cook quicker, or sorry, they're more easily dried out in the cooking process. So for this, you want about 1 pound of chicken, and will go proportion-wise with the rest of the stuff that we're doing. If you want to make this a single serving meal, if you want to amp it up for a bigger family meal, you would just increase the serving size or the overall sizes for everything. All right. So my chicken is prepped. I'm gonna wash my hands because again, I don't want to touch anything with this nasty hand that I've been doing the chicken with. Next thing we're gonna do is get our spice mixture together. So our spices, we're gonna do a variety of spices. I'm just gonna kind of push this chicken off to the side here so you can see my spice mixture. But we are going to do a couple of your kind of classic Italian spices. So your oregano, rosemary, and thyme. Those are 3, I always say they're the green spices, and that means Italian. And then we're gonna do 2 of your kind of spicier ones. So I have chili powder here, cayenne pepper, red pepper flakes, anything that has a little bit of a kick to it is gonna be a good one. And then I also have paprika here. And paprika is gonna give it, again, kind of that nice kick and a little bit of color as well. So we're gonna do 1 teaspoon of paprika. If you don't have paprika, you can just omit this. It's not key, it's just gonna give a little bit of spice to the dish. Paprika is actually just ground up bell peppers, which are like the peppers that you would just eat on a veggie tray or something like that, and chili peppers. So a little bit of that kind of mildness, but then the chili peppers, a little bit of that heat. They're really high in vitamin C, and actually all paprika is a little bit different. So If you're using it for the first time, you want to just kind of test it and see how spicy it is, because they range from mild to very spicy. Mine's kind of a more mild one, and there's a couple different varieties out there as well, Spanish or Hungarian and that sort of thing. I'm not going to get into the specifics of those, but there are different varieties. Then we're going to do 1 teaspoon of chili powder, or cayenne pepper, or red pepper flakes. I would do a little bit less, not not 1/2 teaspoon. I would do maybe a 1/4 teaspoon, just because I think those are have a bit more of a kick than chili powder or cayenne pepper. And again, you can always add more seasoning when we taste it at the end if you feel like it needs it. So don't get too caught up in making sure that this is exactly right, because we can always add more seasoning in. If you don't like spice, these are the 2 ingredients, the chili powder and the paprika, that you should limit and then try to add back in at the end if you feel like it needs some more heat. We're gonna do a 1/2 teaspoon of oregano. And if you don't have the oregano, rosemary, or thyme, you could always just do like an Italian seasoning mix, or any mixture of whatever herbs you do have. Oregano is actually a really easy herb to grow, and it's probably the most common one besides basil in Italian cooking. Thyme is also fairly easy to grow. It will actually do okay if you start it in the summertime, or if you have it in the summertime. You can usually get the plant to come back again the next summer, as long as you take it in from outside. So it's a really great herb to grow in a pot, and you stick it outside during the summer months where it's really nice, hot, and a lot of sun. And then you bring it back in kind of in the fall when it starts to get a little bit cold. And then finally is our rosemary. So rosemary, the rosemary I have comes in kind of like these little stalks, and that's typical for rosemary. So if you do have these stalk-like ones, you will just want to kind of crush them up a little bit, because having them whole like that is not going to be great. And that's my timer going off for the granola. So as soon as I put my rosemary in, I'm going to take my granola out, but we're going to do 1/2 teaspoon of rosemary. Rosemary is a fairly pungent herb, so it is going to have a fairly strong taste to it. And again, rosemary is easy to grow, comes back year after year. All right, let me see, where's my hot? Okay. So granola coming out of the oven, it's gonna look maybe a little bit lighter in color than when we put it in, but still should have that nice cocoa color to it. We're gonna just go ahead and lightly toss it. So you're just going to kind of take it and just turn a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're not doing anything fancy. If some pieces don't get turned, it's not going to be the end of the world. And then once you've turned it over, it still should be soft, which is what we want. It's not going to get hard until we take it out of the oven and let it rest for a minute. And then once you're done turning it, you're just going to kind of spread it back out just like you did when we first put it in, and stick it right back in the oven. And it's going to go same temperature again for 15 minutes. If you want it to come out kind of more in those clumps, you're going to actually press down on it a little bit at this point to kind of get it to solidify to each other in the oven. If you don't care about that and you're fine with it being a little bit more individualized, then you don't have to do that. So again, another 15 minutes in the oven. And back to our seasoning mixture. So in here we have our paprika, 1 teaspoon, 1/2 teaspoon of, for me, chili powder, but cayenne pepper, red pepper flakes. Those are the 2 spicy ingredients. So if you don't like spice, limit those. If you have red pepper flakes, do about a 1/4 teaspoon rather than the 1/2 teaspoon. Then we have 1/2 teaspoon of oregano, 1/2 teaspoon of thyme, and 1/2 teaspoon of rosemary. And I'm just kind of crunching my rosemary up because, like I said, mine was in those little stalks. They look like little pieces of grass almost. It doesn't, you don't have to pulverize them, but I just want them to not be quite so long, just because they'll stick better to the chicken when they're a little bit smaller. And then the final thing is we'll just put a little bit of salt in here. So 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And that is going to be our spice mixture that we're going to put on our chicken. So I'm just gonna mix that up a little bit, just make sure everything's kind of evenly distributed. And then what we're gonna do is we're just gonna sprinkle this over top of our chicken. And then we're gonna use one hand to just kind of mix it around and make sure we evenly coat the chicken. So I'm just gonna kind of put my chicken here in the center. I'm gonna take my non-chickeny hand and grab some of the spice, about a pinch, and sprinkle that onto my chicken. You are gonna have some spice mixture left, and we want that because we're gonna add it into the cooking a little bit later on. And I'm gonna put just a little bit more of the spice mixture on my chicken because my pinch wasn't quite enough. And so then we have our seasoned chicken. All right. Now we are going to wash our hands one more time. And then we're going to start the oil on the stove. So I have this nice big pot that I'm going to put on the stove, and we're actually going to move the camera from this prep station over to the stove so you can kind of see what's going on. But you want a pan that's going to be big enough to hold your ingredients, and we're going to end up putting all of the pasta and all of the liquid in, so it shouldn't be a small saucepan. I happen to have this one that has nice deep edges, but if you just have like a big kind of spaghetti pot, that will be fine as well. So if you only have a pot that's more like this, that'll be totally fine also. All right, so we're gonna use olive oil to put into our pan. Olive oil is probably the healthiest oil that you can use, and it has its pros over a lot of the other oils. So olive oil has a lot of the really healthy fats that we want. It's super versatile. You can use it in baking, you can use it in cooking. And it is usually for light to medium heat. So we're not gonna do any sort of frying with olive oil because it actually will start smoking. You'll use a different type of oil for that if that's what you were going for. But olive oil is what I'm gonna use today. And you're just gonna put a little bit of that in the pan. So enough that your chicken will not stick to the pan, but doesn't have to be kind of over top of or over the bottom of the pan all the way. And then I'm going to go ahead and turn the oven or the stove on. We're going to do about medium to medium high heat for that. We're going to let that oil heat up a little bit. With the different oils, you might also have, like a veggie oil or a canola oil at home. Canola oil is going to have a higher smoke point, so if you were doing some sort of frying, then you would use that canola oil. It doesn't have a lot of nutrients that olive oil does, but it does have some of those healthy fats that olive oil has. And veggie oil is probably, your vegetable oil is probably the least beneficial of all of the oils because it has very few nutrients. It's a mixture of a bunch of different oils, so it's really just whatever the company could get cheaply, and they put it all together. So I would say olive oil is the best oil, and then canola oil. If you wanted to get into some of the other ones like avocado, safflower, they have all sorts of varieties. There's pros and cons to all of those as well. But olive oil for low to medium heat, canola oil for medium to high heat. Olive oil is also really good with no heat at all. So in your salad dressings or in your baked goods, it's also really great. So over at the stove, I'm gonna go over there and I'm gonna put my chicken in. Let me grab a spatula so I don't have to touch it. I'm gonna go ahead and put it in. So my oil wasn't quite hot enough because it didn't do any sort of sizzle, but that's okay. For this dish, it doesn't really matter. For some dishes, you don't want your protein or your vegetables sitting in that oil for too long because it's going to soak it up. But for this, it's fine because all that oil is going to stay in the pan anyways. But for like a fried food or something, if you ever eat fried food, it feels super greasy. That's usually because the oil wasn't hot enough. So it just absorbed a lot of the oil rather than the oil crisping it up instantly. So over here, I'm just kind of separating my chicken a little bit so it doesn't all clump together. And chicken does a great job of telling you when it is starting to be cooked because it's going to turn kind of a nice white on it. And that means that those proteins are cooking. If you could substitute anything in this recipe. So you could substitute sausage, you could substitute shrimp, you could substitute hot dogs if you had them. Whatever protein you have could go into this recipe. And you would just cook those kind of according to how you would normally cook that. So the chicken is over there cooking. I'm just gonna kind of clean up my workstation a little bit and get some of the grimy chicken mess out of the way. And then we should still have some of our seasoning mix left over. So I'm gonna go ahead and put that over by the stove. And then some onion and garlic is also over by the stove already. The other thing that I'm gonna add is a little bit of black pepper. I'm just gonna sprinkle that over top of the chicken. So black pepper is the mildest of the peppers. That's why it's commonly placed on the kitchen table. So it is still gonna bring like a little bit of heat, but not anything too crazy. So if you were super sensitive to heat, you could use more black pepper and omit the chili powder, and you're still gonna get some of those seasonings going on. So my chicken is starting to cook. I can kind of hear it sizzling. And what we're looking for is, it's gonna start to turn white first, and then we're looking for a little bit of golden brown color. We don't have to worry so much about it cooking all the way through because we're gonna put it back in at the end. Granted, we don't want it to be super raw in the middle right now, but we're looking for that fine balance between the two. So I'm just kind of turning it, not being super particular, about making sure all the pieces are the same way because they're all gonna get cooked through. And like I said, I'm using chicken thighs, which are a little bit more forgiving in the cooking process. So I also don't have to stress out as much about drying out my meat for this pasta. So your chicken will probably cook for about 3 minutes. And that's with a little bit of stirring so one side doesn't get too cooked and the other side is raw. You should also start to smell some of those seasonings. So with heat, seasonings become a little bit more fragrant. So I smell that paprika and chili powder. Those are the big two, but all of your spices are going to get a little bit more fragrant when they're exposed to heat. That's one of the reasons why you don't want to store your spices close to the stove, because you don't want that heat kind of making them fragrant when you don't need them. You store them in a cool, dark place, so then they're ready to go when you want to add them to your recipe. You will start to see a little bit of the darker color come into your chicken just because of the spices we use. That paprika and chili powder give it that little bit of red color, and in the pot it might look a little bit of that brown color that we're going for. And then we're going to take this out when it's done, so if you want to grab a bowl to put all of this chicken in, and then we'll save it for the end of the recipe. So my chicken probably needs about another 30 seconds, and then I'm gonna go ahead and take it out. MP, we still on track?
Yeah, my chicken might take longer because it's frozen, or it was.
Okay, no worries. The next steps are easy. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and take my chicken out. I'm just gonna use a big spoon to plop it over into my bowl. And I'm going to take my pan and I'm going to put it on medium heat now. So I'm going to turn it down so that it's not sizzling so much. It doesn't matter if there is still a little bit of oil left in the pan because we're going to saute our onion and garlic in there now. So I took my pan off because it was a little bit too hot. So I'm going to put it back on the stove now. So I have a good amount of oil still left in my pan, so I don't think that I need to add any more. And we're going to go ahead and add the onion and garlic. So the onion and garlic are going to go in, and you want to turn the heat down to medium because we're not trying to get crispy onion or garlic. We're trying to kind of get that nice melty onion and garlic. So onion and garlic are two things that they're going to start to show you when they're ready and we're starting to cook. So onion is going to turn from that really kind of opaque color where you can't see through it, that nice white, into a more clear color, see-through. And then the garlic is going to start to get really fragrant after about a minute of cooking, as well as turn a little bit of a more translucent color. So I can definitely smell my onions starting to cook, and my garlic is coming through a little bit as well. We're going to cook this for about 2 minutes, or until you start to see that translucent color of your onion come through. We don't want the onion to be firm. It's going to have a very strong onion taste if you don't cook it all the way through, which is really off-putting for a lot of people. When you let it cook slow like we're doing, not on high heat, it's going to get kind of that nice mellow onion flavor that we're looking for. And you do want to stir it somewhat frequently because we are, again, not trying to get crispy onion or garlic. We're trying to make sure that it all cooks evenly through. And if your stove is anything like mine, it's probably a couple of spots where they get a little bit hotter than other spots. So you want to stir it to make sure one little bit of your onion and garlic isn't hogging all of the heat. So some of my smaller onion pieces are starting to take on that kind of translucent color. And my bigger pieces are still a little bit of that white look. So I did not do a great job cutting them all to the exact same size, but like I said, we're not going for a Food Network star here. We're going for yummy dinner here. So we're gonna be just fine. Okay. I think about another 30 seconds and that onion and garlic will be done. So the next thing that we're going to go ahead and get out is your milk and your chicken broth and your pasta. So if you don't have chicken broth, you can substitute water. It's not going to have quite as strong of a flavor as chicken broth, but I don't have chicken broth at home. I forgot to pick it up from the store, so I'm just going to use water. You're going to do the same substitute, so it's going to be 1/2 cup of chicken broth, and it would be 1/2 cup water. You don't have to do anything with that. Chicken broth also comes in like the little bouillon cubes, and that's very popular. It's very easy to kind of keep that on hand because it doesn't go bad. If you are using those, you're going to do 1 of those cubes to 8 ounces of water, and that makes about 1 cup of your bouillon. Now, those are very, very salty, so I would suggest tasting it. Once you put it in, just kind of tasting it and making sure the salt level is okay. I might even just do, for ours, we need 1.5 cups of chicken broth. I might just do 1/2 or 1 cup of the bouillon and then do 1/2 cup of water because I don't want it to be super salty. Whenever you do liquid measuring, you always want to use a liquid measuring cup. And this is because while they're both 1 cup, the vessel is designed, this is designed specifically for liquid. So for this, it probably doesn't matter too much, but especially if you're baking, you want to make sure you're using the proper measuring cup. So this is a dry measuring cup and this is a wet measuring cup. And baking is basically science, like a chemistry lab. So you obviously know you don't want to add too much of any one chemical because it will make the consistency a little bit off. And that's my timer going off for my granola. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that out.
Where's the milk and chicken broth going?
Milk and chicken broth are going right into the pot. Our question was, where are they going? We're going to put them right into our onion and garlic mixture. So once you take your granola out, you can turn your oven off. And this is what my granola looks like. So pretty much the same as when I first put it in. And we're just going to put it over to the side so that it can cool a little bit. So my chicken broth, or for me, my water, is going into my onion and garlic. And then we're going to do our milk. So it's going to be 1.5 cups of milk, 1.5 cups of milk. I'm using regular milk because that's what I happen to have on hand, but almond milk, oat milk, kind of whatever milk you would normally drink is fine. Obviously, if you can't have dairy, you're not going to be using regular cow's milk. It will change the flavor a little bit if you use almond milk or oat milk, but it's not going to be anything too dramatic. So 1.5 cups of milk is going to go into the pan. And then the final thing we're putting in the pan is our pasta. So whatever pasta you have on hand, I'm using some penne pasta. You're going to put 12 ounces of pasta into the pan. So usually a box is about 16 ounces. If you want to put the whole box in, you can totally do that. That's fine. We're going to have enough liquid to be able to do that and cook it all the way through. So if this will probably feed about 4 people if you do all of this with your chicken. And so if you're looking to cut your recipe, you would just cut the amount of pasta that you're putting in. So I'm going to put about 12 ounces of mine into the pan. No, I don't know if that was exactly 12 ounces. That was a nice little guesstimate that I just did. So we'll see how it works out. And then you're just going to stir that all together so the noodles are somewhat coated in the pan. So you can see my liquid pretty much covers my noodles, but not all the way, and that's fine because we're going to be stirring it a little bit so all the noodles are going to be able to get some love. And then we're just going to bring this up to a nice little simmer. So simmer is just before you start to get that nice roaring boil. So I'm going to put my heat up to about medium high, and then watch it. And we don't want it to boil because typically you don't want to boil milk because then it starts to lose some of its properties that we're looking for, some of the creaminess. And once we get it to a simmer, we're just going to cover it and just let it do its thing. We'll stir it a couple of times. Once we get it to the simmer, then we're going to add our seasoning, the rest of our seasoning mix into it.
Onions in there?
Yep, the onions and garlic are in here. And so is our chicken broth, our milk, and our pasta. All of that is in this container currently. And we're going to let that do its thing. And then when you feel like you have a nice little simmer going, you're going to go ahead and put in your spices. Is it imperative that you put in your spices right as soon as it starts to simmer? No, you can put them in before it simmers, after it simmers, whatever, it does not matter. So my seasonings are in there and I'm going to mix it together. You are going to see that that milk is going to kind of take on that pink reddish color from the paprika and the chili powder. That's exactly what we want. And I can kind of smell it with the heat has already activated those spices again. So you can kind of see what we have going on in this pot. All of our seasoning is in there, all of our pasta, all of our liquids, our onion and garlic are in there as well. So mine is starting to kind of have that simmer quality, so it's not quite to the bubbles bursting of boiling, but I can tell that it is getting there. So I'm going to go ahead and put a lid on it. And we're just going to let that sit for probably about 3 or 4 minutes, and then I'm going to stir it and make sure all the pasta gets some loving. So as you are waiting for this to, the next thing that you have to do, you can go ahead and look at your granola. So my granola is still a little bit warm, but you can kind of see we have some clumps, we have some small little sections here, but you can go ahead and taste it. It should be nice and sweet with a little bit of chocolatey. Your nuts should be cooked all the way through. Because we cooked it on that lower temperature, nothing should be burned, even if you did substitute some of the other things in there, like pecans, walnuts, oatmeal that's already been chopped up. So it should be good to go. And this oatmeal is going to be great in the mornings with some yogurt. Greek yogurt, regular yogurt, whatever you would normally have. I also just snack on it during the day because it hits my sweet tooth, but also because it has so much fat, good fats and protein, keeps me full, so it's a nice little snack. And then I've also had it for dinner over top of some ice cream, or just, again, kind of eaten as is. We've also put it in our smoothies in the morning because it has a lot of the stuff that we might already put in a smoothie. We just blend it all up and have that. And it'll store for about 7 days or so. If you can go 7 days without eating the whole thing, I'll be impressed. But it'll store for about 7 days just sitting on your kitchen counter or in your pantry. If you think it's going to take a little bit longer than that for you to eat it, I would put it in the fridge after maybe 3 or 4 days. So I'm going to go ahead and put that into the container that I'm going to keep it in. Okay. So I'm going to check on my pasta and just give it a quick little stir. So you can see in the middle there, it has that little boiling. So I'm going to turn down the heat just a little bit and just mix it around. Now, I'm not Italian, but Italians are obviously very particular about their pasta. So a couple of the different pastas and when you would use them. So I'm using penne because that's what I had. And typically the Italians say that those short pastas, so what do you mean by short pastas? You mean pastas that are kind of smaller like this. So your penne, your rigatoni, which are the spirals, anything like that is going to be good if you have other large things in your pasta. So if you have chopped up veggies or beans or olives or chunks of meat, they're going to be good because you can grab all that goodness with these noodles easily. And then they're also going to hold onto the sauce really well. So whatever sauce you have paired with that. Your short, what they call holy pasta, basically just has holes in it. So like your shells or, or your penne, which has the hole in the middle, is good for smaller things. So if you have peas or toasted nuts or something like that, because you can get stuck into those little holes, you can get a good mouthful of all of your ingredients in one. And then your longer pastas, so like your spaghettis, your thin angel hair, your linguine, fettuccine, anything like that is going to be better with a sauce, a silky sauce, that's what they say. So like your fettuccine Alfredo, or any sort of sauce that has ground meat, so spaghetti sauce or chopped herbs or something like that. So they're very particular about which pasta you use with which sauces. I just use whatever I have on hand. So I see that my milk is still boiling a little bit, so I'm going to turn down the heat and then give it another stir. And pasta you make from the box is dried pasta, so all it needs is some sort of liquid to kind of rehydrate itself and become cooked. If you eat raw pasta, it doesn't do any harm because it's actually already kind of been cooked through. If you make fresh pasta, it's going to take a lot longer to cook. You really only need to dunk it into in our pot, it would just be for like a minute or two, or if you were doing water, just a minute or two in there because it's already cooked. And the best way to tell if pasta is done is just to try a bite of it. I like mine to have a little bit more of a firm bite to it, but some people really like kind of that more mushy texture to their pasta. So it's just whatever your personal preference is, and the only way to kind of tell how your pasta is in the pan is to actually try it. So my pasta, I was able to stab it with my fork and choke a little bit, but it still is a little bit firm. So I'm going to give it probably about another minute or two in there. And what we're going to do is we don't want it to be soupy, but we do still want kind of like a creamy sauce at the end. So if you feel like mine has way too much liquid and my pasta is almost done, you can go ahead and take the lid off. That'll let some of the steam evaporate, so we're not holding it all into the pot. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give it another stir. Then I'm going to leave the lid off so that all the steam can evaporate and we get a little bit more of a creamy sauce rather than a soupy pasta. Now, the last thing that we can do to prep for the pasta is if you want to add any sort of toppings on top. So I have a tomato that I want to put on top, but if you had any sort of fresh herb or green onion or Parmesan cheese or kind of whatever you wanted to add, now would be the time to prep that. The other thing is you could very easily add any sort of vegetable to this dish. So you could do peppers of any kind, you could do peas, green beans, asparagus, spinach, carrots, whatever you kind of have on hand in your fridge and you want to get rid of, you could put that into this dish. So some of those things are going to need a little bit more of a cooking time, so you would put them in right after the onion and garlic, probably in with the broth and pasta. Something like spinach or any sort of green lettuce type thing can be thrown at the very end because all you need to do is wilt it and then it'll be perfect for your dish. I don't have any of that stuff on hand, so I'm not going to throw any of that in, but that would be a great way to incorporate some vegetables, but not just have to eat them separate on the side, to actually have them in your dish with you. So I'm going to try a bite of my pasta again and try not to choke on it. So my pasta is probably cooked just about right. So I'm going to turn the heat down to low because I don't want to overcook my pasta, but it still is a little bit soupy, so I want some of that to evaporate. Part of it will thicken up a little bit as we take it off the heat, so I'm not going to put it on or keep it on the heat for too much longer, but just enough to try to get a little bit more of that broth and milk to evaporate. So I'm actually going to go ahead and chop up my tomato as I let that evaporate a little bit more. And if you have anything else that you want to throw into or on top of your pasta at the end, this is when you can do that. I like a little bit of tomato because I think it adds just a nice little bit of freshness to the pasta. If I had some fresh herbs, I would also put probably some parsley on top, or maybe a little bit of oregano if I had it, since we already put some oregano in the dish. Parmesan cheese always goes well on top of pasta, so that is always a good choice if you are looking for something to top your pasta with. And then we have lemon juice is our kind of final thing that we're going to throw into this pot. So I have half of a lemon that I'm going to use. If you don't have lemon juice, you can substitute any type of citrus, so lime, orange, anything like that, or you could do vinegar. So we're going to look for about 1 tablespoon of lemon juice. So if you're using vinegar, you probably want to do about 1 teaspoon, maybe 1.5 teaspoons. I would put 1 teaspoon in, try it, see, and if you want to add a little bit more, you can. Basically, all this lemon is doing is giving it a little bit of acid to cut through some of that milk that we put in there, the creaminess, as well as give it a little bit of brightness. So lemon juice is great for that. Fresh herbs also kind of bring that brightness to the dish. If you do have half of a lemon, there's obviously some seeds in this half. So the way that you get through that is we're going to actually kind of strain it through our fingers to catch some of those seeds before they go into the pot, so then you don't have to try to pick them through. So you can see I caught some of these seeds before they were going to go into the dish, which is exactly what we want. And I have a really juicy lemon here, but if you felt like, my lemon feels a little bit firm, I don't know how much juice is in there, what you can do is you can roll it on your counter or roll it in your hand to kind of get some of those juices set free. And then at this point, we're going to do a little bit of a taste test and see what we think of it. Does it need some more salt, some more heat? What do we want? And this is where you really customize it to whatever your taste buds prefer. So I typically like things a little bit more spicy, so I might throw some more spice in, I don't know. If you felt like it needed more acid or anything, more salt, you would put it in. So I'm actually going to turn the heat off of mine because I know that it is cooked, and then I'm going to try it and see what I think. I think mine's actually pretty good. I might maybe throw a little bit of heat on in the bowl itself. Ooh, got lemon juice in a cut. But for what I want right now, mine's fine. Once you feel like that is how you want your pasta, everything seasons correctly, we're gonna throw the chicken back in, stir it up, and then we can put it in our plates or bowls. So like I said, if you felt like, I don't know if my chicken was cooked all the way, this is where we would let it finish cooking. I think my chicken is cooked all the way, so I'm just gonna kind of toss it all together, get some of the yummy sauce all on the chicken, and then I'm gonna put it in my bowl. And then I'm going to take my bowl. So you can see mine's not really the soupy quality, but it definitely looks like there is sauce on it, and that's kind of exactly what we want. If yours is still a little bit soupy, you would just keep it on the heat a little bit longer to help some of that evaporate. So there's what my bowl looks like. I'm going to throw a little bit of tomato on. And then if I had cheese or if I had anything else I wanted to throw on, I would do that now. I don't have any of those things, so I'm not going to, but I'll show you what my finished product looks like. So there we go. And then that's it. So you would plate up as many plates as you wanted for the chicken pasta to be. Top it with whatever you want, and then dinner is ready for you. So that's it. If you want to, I might put a little black pepper on the top of mine just because, but there you have it, your Cajun chicken pasta. If you have any questions about anything, feel free to reach out via email. I'm always here to answer the questions. And thanks for cooking with me. I hope to see you next time.